So I'll start with a few people remembering, or definitely remembering, the time before non-drowsy antihistamines with the yeses that were coming up, which then led to lots of questions about sleep. So Ash has asked, how does orexin factor into the dopaminergic system during sleep?
How does orexin is the chemical that sort of stops you slipping from sleep to wake too quickly. So it kind of stabilizes the two systems. So they both inhibit each other. The sleep system, when it's on, dampens down activity in the wake bit of the hypothalamus, and the wake system dampens down activity in the sleep bit of the hypothalamus. And then the orexin is sort of an extra little loop in there that sort of helps it be harder to get from one to the other. How that links with dopamine, I don't remember reading anything directly about that. That's not to say that it doesn't. One thing that I definitely found in the book is that everything links to everything else. But the brain chemicals that are super important in wake, I've got the list somewhere. Hang on, where have they gone? So there's acetylcholine, which helps you sort of concentrate and focus. And there was histamine, which does that as well. And then, where's it gone? Here we go. So orexin, so orexin does the stabilizing. So what was there? My list. So it did have dopamine in there. Sorry, so many chemicals, so little time. Yeah, so dopamine, noradrenaline, serotonin, glutamate, histamine, and acetylcholine are all involved in the wake system. I did, when I first started the book, I was very much hoping that I was going to be able to sort of list out each chemical that's involved in each of these areas, but I very quickly realized that I would pretty much be listing all of them in all of them. So what I ended up doing in the book is picking out a few that I found were particularly interesting, that had either really interesting stories around their discovery or that had really interesting effects on us, because trying to get everything in there was just not going to work. So yeah, it's a bit of a kind of, I picked out some of the most important, most interesting. That doesn't mean that the others aren't involved in some way as well.
Well, having read the book, you've picked out some very good bits. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So Kate has asked, the neurotransmitters between awake and sleep state that we've just covered there have a quantitative difference, although while sleeping, we can experience feelings, visions, etc. as like being awake. Could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yes. So it depends on which phase of sleep we're looking at. So when we go to sleep, we aren't just doing the same thing all night. We go through these different phases, and there's deep sleep, and you sort of go down into that gradually, and then you come back out of it. And then we have REM sleep, which is short for rapid eye movement sleep, because your eyes kind of dart around under your eyelids during that time. And that's when you do the most dreaming, during rapid eye movement sleep. And actually, we see different combinations of chemicals in each of those different phases of sleep. We think that's why you get kind of different experiences during sleep. So if I am remembering correctly, during REM sleep, you have less of the monoamines, which includes dopamine, serotonin, adrenaline, noradrenaline, but you have similar levels of some of the other ones, including glutamate. So your brain is really active, but there's a bit less of the kind of emotional chemicals in there. Although dreams can be very emotional, so you're definitely still experiencing some emotions, but it's slightly different state to the one you're in during wake. But yeah, different combinations of chemicals during each of the different phases of sleep, basically. And this is why we think it's really important, that the different phases are really important. I find it fascinating that scientists don't understand why we sleep yet. We don't know what it's for. There are a few different theories, but we don't know fully what it's for. And one of the things that sleeping pills can do is they sometimes put you to sleep, but change the phases of your sleep. And because we don't know what sleep's for and what each of those phases do, no one knows if that might have an impact on something long term, which is one of the reasons that most drugs, sleeping pills, are only recommended for use in the short term.
Yes, we had someone talk about sleep a couple of weeks ago, and you're right, it's just, why do we do it? I don't know, but I like doing it, so I'm going to keep trying to
Well,
sleep.
we know it's super important. If you don't sleep, you will die. So you definitely have to keep doing it, even if we don't know exactly why.
So moving on to the swearing study that you mentioned, I did put a link, and I think my manager, Hello, is in the chat as well. He's put a link in there as well. We have a link to a talk previously by someone that talks about how swearing is good for you. And we tried out the study on RI staff as well. We put our hands in ice water, swore at the camera, and then saw what would happen. So enjoy those, everyone in the audience. So a couple of people have asked, what if the person doing the swearing is bilingual? Does that have an effect? Has there been research into whether using your first language compared to your second language swearing, does that have an effect on what you feel and the effect of pain? I don't
think they've done that study. What they have done is they discovered that people who swear a lot don't get the same effect. So if you're one of those people who swears all the time, so I think they did this on a documentary, and they got, who's that really sweary? They got, was it Brian Blessed? They got someone who swears a lot.
He's definitely sweary.
Yeah, I think it might have been, don't quote me on that, but it might have been Brian Blessed to do it. And he didn't get the same effect. So if you swear all the time, then it doesn't work as well. And that's why they think it's that kind of feeling of naughtiness. So I asked, when I was speaking to Richard Stevens, who did this research, I asked him if you'd have a greater effect if you did it in front of your granny, because it would be like more naughty. And he said they haven't done that experiment, but possibly. So my guess, and this is just a guess, I have no evidence to back this up, but it seems logical, is that if you swore in, say, Spanish, in a room full of people who didn't speak Spanish, it wouldn't feel as naughty and therefore might not have the same effect as if you did it in a room full of people who did speak Spanish. But I would love to see that experiment done, because that's a fascinating question. We know that being bilingual has a huge number of effects on the brain, particularly on that prefrontal cortex that we talked about quite a lot. Because people who are bilingual are constantly switching language, they're constantly having to inhibit the wrong language. And inhibiting things is one of the things that the prefrontal cortex does. So they basically give their brain a workout every time they're speaking. And that means that I know that in kids who are raised bilingual, they generally have better executive function than non-bilingual kids of the same age, which is really interesting, I think.
And you mentioning trying that swearing experiment in front of our grannies, like, I got a hot flush just thinking about doing that now. So maybe it would work. My nan watches these on the replay, so Nana, if you let me, we can try that study.
I think mine's probably watching as well. So,
so when you spoke about receptors continually changing and us trying to target different networks and using like, I guess, unique levels of drugs for people and how to help mental health, Amanda has asked, if receptors are continually changing, what does this mean for the ability to target a network?
That's a really, really good question, because one of the things that happens is if you flood the brain with a drug, the brain tries to sort of fight back and it actually down-regulates the number of receptors that it has. So a classic example of this is caffeine. When you drink caffeine for the first time, that blocks a receptor for a chemical called adenosine, sorry, very similar name. And what adenosine does is it's also involved in sleep and wake. So adenosine builds up throughout the day. So you have less of it in the morning and then more of it in the evening. So it effectively tells your brain how long you've been awake. When you drink caffeine, it blocks the adenosine receptors. So your brain is tricked into thinking there's less of it than there actually is. And that makes you feel more awake. But if you drink caffeine regularly, what your brain does is it starts counteracting that effect. And we don't know exactly how, but one idea is that it might start making more adenosine receptors, and therefore it becomes more sensitive to adenosine. And that's why if you're someone like me who has coffee every morning, you probably now feel worse if you don't get your caffeine than you would have if you'd never drunk it in the first place. And your coffee now just brings you back up to baseline. So there is a real danger with any drug in the brain that the brain sort of fights back to it and it will stop being as effective over time. And we do find that with things like Parkinson's drugs, I believe, I'm not a clinician, but I believe people often have to increase their doses over time because the brain develops what we call tolerance to that drug. So that is definitely a consideration. And something that's quite difficult to get around, I think.
And Roshni has asked, could monoclonal antibodies be useful for targeting specific cells?
So, targeted drugs is something that just sort of came out at the end of this book as something that I'm really interested in. I have started looking into it, but I am by no means an expert on different ways of targeting drugs. I know that there are methods where you effectively mark the cells you're interested in with an antibody or something that then locks on to the drug. How you do the marking bit in the brain, I think, is the really difficult bit. I'm not a geneticist, but I believe it's sometimes done with viral vectors and things, and again putting things like that, there's a lot of considerations in the brain. I think there've been quite a lot of interesting developments made in petri dishes and in animals and things, but there's so many issues with the brain that I don't know. I'm not going to say no. I think we're probably closer to a couple of other methods. So there's one where you can get a drug into the fluid around the brain, bypassing the blood-brain barrier by inhaling it through the nose. And then someone's working on a thing where you pulse ultrasound into an area of the brain, and that creates these little bubbles that sort of draw the drug out in just that area. And there's other people working on magnetic nanoparticles that you can direct using magnets. I think we're a little way off with those. I think implantable things are probably going to be the first stage. So I was reading something about someone who's looking at treating brain cancer, and while they're doing the surgery, putting a little implantable device in that can deliver the chemotherapy directly to the tumor after the surgery's been done, and you've already got their brain open. So obviously it's lower risk. So I think things like that will probably be the first stage. But yeah, this is something that I really want to learn more about, because I think it's fascinating. But yeah, it's not, I don't think we're quite there yet, particularly with the brain being so complicated. And we need, as I say, we need the individualized treatment when it comes to the brain as well, because I might try and put something in your nucleus accumbens and it might not be exactly where my nucleus accumbens is, and that could be a disaster. So we'd have to be able to map exactly where in each individual's brain we were targeting, as well as having a way of getting the drug there. So it's kind of an extra level of complexity.
Sally has asked, I think this is going to be our last question before we wrap up. Is personality an outcome or a function of brain chemicals? By taking my psychoactive meds, am I changing me?
Oh, so this is a great question. It's actually quite an amusing one for me, because I started trying to write a chapter on personality. When I did my original pitch to Sigma, it was one of my 8 chapters. And I spent a good few weeks reading about it, and I found lots of interesting research on the psychology of personality and the big 5 traits and all of that kind of stuff. But what I was really struggling with was connecting that up with brain chemistry. There were a few little kind of maybe tentative beginning bits, but I just couldn't find enough solid, reliable research to write a chapter on it. So my answer is probably, but if you're asking me how, And I don't think anyone knows right now. So lots more research still to be done on the brain and brain chemistry. But I think that's one of the things that makes it a really exciting area, that every time I go back to a topic that I thought I understood, I find something's changed and there's some new information, and it changes the way we think about it. But I find that quite interesting.
I think what I liked most about your book is that I didn't quite realize, you just assume that maybe some things have been simplified because it's a difficult topic, but you don't quite realize how oversimplified things have been, and how media headlines about serotonin and dopamine being these amazing wonder drugs for one specific thing. It's just
and I still simplified stuff for the book. Like, I'm sure researchers reading it will still think I have oversimplified, but I've tried to give that extra level and just give people the kind of the tools to understand when they read something, that because you have to simplify it. When you're writing an article, you've got 1,000 words. There's no way you can explain everything. So I think the important thing is that people have the tools to know when something's been oversimplified, and to just take it with a pinch of salt, particularly if that person is trying to sell you something, because they might be oversimplifying it for their benefit rather than for yours.
Yes, I think that's very good advice. And I'll end on the last, it's a comment, not a question, which usually fills me with dread in the theatre, but this is a nice one. Elisa said, I love your chemical top, or the chemicals on your top. And I know you were showing us your necklace and your bracelet as well, which some people might not have been able to see, but very on brand today.
Oxytocin on my necklace because it wouldn't fit in my mix of chemicals on my top. And then I also have a bracelet which has a whole bunch of different brain chemicals on it. This is from Made with Molecules, who are wonderful. They do amazing molecular jewelry. They do lots of like non-brainy ones as well. So you can get like the chemical in red wine or chocolate or whatever if you're a fan of those. So not sponsored, love to be, but I just think she's brilliant. So recommend that.
Excellent. Well, thank you. And thank you so much, Ginny, for your talk. Before we go, I just want to say thank you to the audience for joining us, and thank you. It's our first lunchtime event and there's loads of you, so thank you very much for tuning in, and for those watching on replay as well, thank you as well. We love that you're joining us each week and enjoying the content that we have. And if you haven't already done so, please do consider donating via our Just Giving page if you want to send some money to the RI. If you're enjoying the events, it does help us a lot. Or if you want to do a continual support, you can sign up as an RI member or patron through our website. Our next event is on Tuesday after our lovely long bank holiday weekend. At least here in the UK, and it's with Carlo Ravelli, and he'll be in conversation with Conrad Shawcross, exploring the idea of quantum physics. So that is going to be a very interesting talk indeed. And also don't forget that Ginny's book, which got a slide for here, Overloaded: How Every Aspect of Your Life is Influenced by Your Brain Chemicals, is available to purchase as well. So that's it from me. Thank you very much to Ginny as well. Is there anything you wanted to say before we all go?
Thank you for coming, and I really hope you enjoyed that. Sorry I didn't get to answer anyone's questions. I don't know, Lisa, if you can save the questions. I might be able to try and answer some of them on Twitter.
Yeah, absolutely. I can send you those.
I will see what I can do. So yes, if you have a question that hasn't been answered, then follow me on Twitter, and I might, if I have time, I will try and answer some of them.
Excellent. That sounds good. So thank you for everybody for watching, and goodbye.